Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa Theologica podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa Theologica podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas, and his Catholic faith is day 279. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 43 and 44 of the supplement to the Summa. That is of matrimony with regard to the betrothal and of the definition of matrimony. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code Summa 10. And so here we go. Article 1, whether a betrothal is a promise of future marriage. Yes, it is, and as far as the custom was observed in St. Thomas's day, it involved the following. First, merely a promise by saying, I will take thee for my wife, and conversely, secondly, by giving betrothal pledges, such as money and the like. Thirdly, by giving an engagement ring. Fourthly, by the addition of an oath. Now, I imagine not all these occurred in every betrothal, but these seem to be the steps or gradation of seriousness of intent when it came to that promise. One also could make a conditional betrothal. A conditional betrothal would be opposed to what St. Thomas calls an absolute betrothal, which is what we referred to in our previous citation from St. Thomas. Article 2, whether 7 years is fittingly assigned as the age for betrothal. After one has completed the 7th year of life, St. Thomas says they have matured to the point that one can learn from another, but is incapable by himself of consideration and understanding, which is why a child is sent to school around this age, and at this age, the child can be, according to St. Thomas, betrothed to another. Now, don't panic. This doesn't mean by any means that one could get married at that age, but that one could be pledged to another in marriage at that age. Fleshing this out, along with the possibility of not going through with one's betrothal, Aquinas writes, if the parties are betrothed by another person before they reach the age of puberty, either of them or both can demur. That means like back out of the betrothal. Wherefore, in that case, the betrothal does not take effect. Hence, a betrothal made between certain persons by some other takes effect insofar as those between whom the betrothal is arranged do not demur when they reach the proper age, whence they are understood to consent to what others have done. And it is not until the child has reached the conclusion of their 14th year of life, St. Thomas says, that they have the maturity, both physical and mental, to then engage in actual marriage. To quote Aquinas again, he says, at the end of the second 7 years, he can bind himself in matters concerning his person, either to religion or to wedlock. Article 3, whether a betrothal can be dissolved. The answer is yes. Canon law states today a promise of marriage, whether unilateral or bilateral, which is called an engagement, is governed by the particular law established by the Conference of Bishops after it has considered any existing customs in civil law. But then when it comes to the United States Conference of Bishops, it stated, the National Conference of Catholic Bishops intends to issue no norms regarding the promise of marriage as mentioned in canon law. So we have nothing in the U.S. Catholic Church, it appears to me, according to church law, when it comes to engagement. And thus, I suppose one could promise to marry a woman and then, for whatever reason, reconsider, not go through with such a promise freely without any formal process in that promise or its dissolving dissolution. We then turn to question 44 of the definition of matrimony. Article 1, whether matrimony is a kind of joining, in a sense, from St. Thomas. Further, the union of two things into one can result only from their being joined. Now, such is the effect of matrimony, as it is written in Genesis chapter 2, they shall be one flesh. Wherefore, matrimony is a kind of joining. Aquinas continues, since by marriage certain persons are directed to one united begetting and upbringing of children, and again to one family life, it is clear that in matrimony there is a joining in respect of which we speak of husband and wife, and this joining, though being directed to some one thing, is matrimony. Article 2, whether matrimony is fittingly named. In looking at the name matrimony, we should keep in mind, as we related in the previous article, that the cause of marriage is the ceremony we call a wedding. The essence of marriage is union of the spouses, both in vow and then consummated in the marital act. Then the effect of matrimony is children. Thus this word matrimony, St. Thomas says, we have taken from 2 Latin words, which may be matris munium, that would be of the mother's work, since matrimony is about offspring whose nourishment and upbringing falls heavily on the mother. Or perhaps the word matrimony comes from the Latin matrem muniens. That would be working for the mother, since in matrimony a woman receives a lifelong husband to provide and protect her. St. Thomas gives other Latin phrases and speculations in the text for the roots of the word matrimony, if one is interested, although the aforesaid roots are, in my opinion, the most likely roots of the word. Article 3, whether matrimony is fittingly named. The definition given by Peter Lombard looks like marriage is the marital union of man and woman involving living together in undivided partnership. And this definition works because it includes the essence of marriage, which is the union, the cause, which was the promise of undivided partnership, and even the effect in the sense that it mentions marital union and partnership, which carnally naturally leads to children. So the above definition is not terrible, yet since we might want a more explicit definition as spelled out by the modern-day catechism when it comes to marriage, not just as a human or natural institution, but also as a sacrament, it is written, the matrimonial covenant by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole of life is by its nature ordered toward the good of the spouses and the procreation and education of offspring. This covenant between baptized persons has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament. And because marriage is a true community of persons, as a community, it rightly is organized under the rule of law, which in the case of the sacrament of matrimony is ecclesiastical law, whereas for marriage considered merely as an institution of nature, it would come under natural and civil law. As St. Thomas mentions, bringing our episode to a close, since every community is regulated by some law, the code according to which this community is directed, namely divine and human law, finds a place in this definition, while other communities, such as those of traders or soldiers, are established by human law alone. And with that, we close another episode. We have just finished covering questions 43 and 44 of the supplement to the Summa, that is of matrimony with regard to betrothal and of the definition of matrimony. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.